Welcome to Stories and Sips. I'm Barry Chandler, coming to you this week from the gorgeous western seaboard of the United States, from Southern California, where it's normally sunny and warm. I think my Irish influence is having an effect on the weather, but hopefully it improves sometime soon. Great week for Irish whiskey. Figures released by the Irish Whiskey Association this week show that sales of Irish whiskey globally have grown year on year. 2019 sales are greater than 2018, and for the first time visitors to Irish whiskey distilleries have surpassed the 1 million visitor mark, which is a tremendous achievement. We're also heading into 2020 with more distilleries than Ireland has had in almost 100 years. 31 distilleries are now commissioned, are now producing their own whiskey, which over the next few years will come to market, will come to fruition, and we get to taste their lovely amber, lovely liquid gold that they're producing. This growth in the number of visitors and of course the quantity of Irish whiskey that's being exported and sold overseas is a tremendous thing for Ireland, for the whiskey industry, for tourism, and of course for jobs, and for of course us, those that like Irish whiskey and tend to enjoy a drop or two. Now, for every one of those distilleries that is now producing their own whiskey, there are probably a dozen Irish whiskey companies or brands that are selling Irish whiskey but don't have their own distillery. Rather, they have been formed as a result of the demand that exists globally for Irish whiskey. They're taking advantage of the renewed and the increased interest in Irish whiskey. They don't have their own distilleries, most of them never will. And I've noticed two things about these companies. They're exporting all over the world. We see a lot of them in the United States on shelves in large retailers like Costco and Trader Joe's, etc. Two things I've noticed. One is that these whiskies oftentimes don't have any story behind them. They are labelled by a retailer with their own label, and they're put on the shelf with the label Irish whiskey and some fanciful name, but there's really no story of the people, the process, the place behind the whiskey. The second thing I've noticed is that if there is a story, it's often made up, and it's a story of a leprechaun or some man with a paddy hat walking down through the countryside saying hello to all the cows, as if that's some kind of good Irish story. And so these two things, I think, are a challenge or something that I don't necessarily love. And if you've been a listener or a viewer of Stories and Sips, you'll know that for me, Irish whiskey tastes better when there's a great story behind it, a story of the people, the passion, the place, the personal struggles behind what took it to where it is today. Which is why I was so excited about 6 months ago when Nick Ryan, the founder of Thomond Gate Whiskey, reached out to me. And I've had many whiskey companies reach out to me wanting me to cover their product or share news or information about their product, but they've mostly fit into those two categories where they didn't really have a story, or the story they told just wasn't very interesting at all. That changed with Nick Ryan and Thomond Gate Whiskey. So with Nick, we have something unique here. We have an individual who is risking it all, putting his money on the line to launch an Irish whiskey brand. Just came to the market within the last number of months. He's doing extraordinary things and has a tremendous vision for his home county of Limerick and what he wants to accomplish with his Irish whiskey brand. It's a story I knew I had to tell. It's a story I wanted to share. His story, his vision are something I think you'll find very compelling indeed. Now, the Irish whiskey industry is built on the backs of individuals who risked it all to build their distilleries. Famous names from 200 years ago like John Jameson, James Power, George Rowe, William Jameson, the list goes on. And this current generation of Irish whiskey business people, men and women, have names that I think we're going to see more and more of, that are going to become more and more familiar as the years go by. Will Nick Ryan be mentioned alongside these great names? That's up to you to decide when you watch this episode. I hope you enjoy it. We sit down with Nick in a new format for Stories and Sips in this series that we're going to cover independent founders of whiskey brands that are doing interesting things. I think you'd like to hear his story, so enjoy.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Nick. Congratulations on the launch of your whiskey brand, Thomond Gate Whiskey. Thrilled to see it out in the wild, and congratulations on the success of your first bottles auctioned off there over the past few weeks. It's been a really interesting to watch the success for such a new brand. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been really humbling. Just really excited to see the support I've got, and I was really excited about the future.
It's incredible to see such interest so early on in a new brand, and I don't think that's very surprising, knowing what the brand is about. We're going to go into some detail on that, but you have shared with me a very audacious goal that you have, and as a Limerick man, you want to bring distilling back to Limerick, to the county, and even to the city by 2030. A massive, audacious, big, hairy, audacious goal that you have, and we're going to come back to that because I want to dive into that in detail. But that sets up what you're trying to do. But when I say bringing whiskey distilling back to Limerick, that would indicate that it's been there before, but it hasn't been there for a long time, right?
Yeah, it's been over 100 years since the Thomond Gate Whiskey distillery operated, and Limerick was a major powerhouse. A number of distilleries operated, and I really feel it's been somewhat a neglected bit of history that I want to revive and put back on the map. As a passionate Limerick man, I feel it's my obligation as part of my vision to make that happen once again.
So it's all very altruistic. You want to give back to Limerick. But when was the last time so tell me about the last whiskey distillery that was in Limerick that you know of?
Well, it was the Thomond Gate Distillery, which traded under a number of names over the years that it operated. It operated from 1809 to 1919, and it was owned by Archibald Walker, by Stein and Brown, and the Limerick Spirit, the Limerick Distilling Company. So a number of entities, but it was always based in Thomond Gate on the banks of the River Shannon, and it was a sizable operation. It was a 6-acre site. It had its own malting houses. It had its own cooperages. It had carpenters, everything that you can imagine that a large-scale distillery would have. And it used to have its own wharf, so they used to bring in turf all the way from Castleconnell to fuel the fires of the stills. And it was a sizable operation. From what I worked out, and I'm standing, hopefully my maths is correct, but I worked out roughly about 9% of the export of Irish whiskey they were producing at the time, which is a sizable amount for a distillery of that size, and it's somewhat overlooked.
You don't hear much about Limerick distilling, obviously, because it's been 101 years since there's been a distillery there. You don't hear it mentioned. Is there a reason why we don't hear much mention of Limerick distilling? I mean, we hear older distilleries that have gone silent.
Well, a lot of the product that they did produce, it was for export, and reading through the archives, a lot of the management were Scottish business operators, and it seemed that they neglected their domestic market, and that's a mistake I feel a new brand like myself won't neglect. What I've seen is that there's a huge support for something like this in Limerick, and I think at the time it was just too much focus on the export potential, and they just simply did not get that traction as others so successfully have done elsewhere.
When we were first talking about Limerick and distilling, and I was sharing how I had cut my teeth in the hotel industry in Limerick myself in Adair, and then you share, well, that's funny, you grew up in the hotel industry yourself, right? So you've got a family background in hospitality. Tell me a little bit about that.
So my youth was spent at my family's hotel, which was Henricke's Hotel, and at the time it was the oldest hotel in Limerick, and it had some really interesting history. De Valera had his meetings there. It is rumoured that Che Guevara had stayed there on his trip to Czech Republic for a summit of the Soviet powers. But I worked there in the bars, I cleaned the dishes, but one of my tasks was always tidying the bar up. And there was this beautiful old print there. I don't know where it is, but I'm fuming that it's not been held for me or somewhere. But it was of the Limerick Distillery, the Thomond Gate Distillery. And it always caught my curiosity, and it gave me a vision into what was there in Limerick. And, you know, you'd always have the odd tourist that would come in and ask for it. And it was always an answer of, you know, here's some Powers or Jameson, but never a Limerick whiskey. So at a young age, the seeds were sown, and later to be germinated at a later date.
Nick, you've your past in the hotel world in Limerick was a precursor to a later arrival in life to the spirits world. But you've been involved in the spirits world before the launch of Thomond Gate Whiskey, right?
I have been in a small way, but it's always been something that's been very passionate to me. So my first venture into the world of whiskey was when I was living in Austria. I noticed how much the Austrians love their mulled wine. And there was a nagging curiosity that would they like hot Irish whiskey? And it was something I tested. And I met the brand ambassador for Jameson at the time and persuaded them, as well as the local bar owners, about Irish whiskey and hot Irish whiskey, to be precise. And I went about conducting a number of events in December. And I was successful in getting all the students involved, as well as the local community. The bar was packed. And I was there with my friends handing out hot Irish whiskies in the freezing cold of the Plats and Grats of Flann O'Brien's Irish Bar, which was a great experience. And it just showed how much people had a warm reception to Irish whiskey and simply how many of them hadn't tried it. And it was great. It was really brilliant.
Now, what about there's an education aspect to your spirit connection too, right?
Yes. Well, when I went out there and I said I wanted to make a passion into something that was greater than myself and eventually something that would be a successful business, hopefully, I said I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was on about. And I had a lot of knowledge that I had built up myself, but at the end of the day, you have to go out there and gain it from the best of it out there. And I went and I got my qualifications from the WSET, the Wine Spirits Educational Trust. I've gone and done my levels 1 to 3, and I'm a qualified APP, which is an educator in spirits. And I'm conducting the first level 1 and 2 spirits course in Ireland, which will be taking place in February and in March of this year. So I'm really, really excited about that. Some really great people coming to those courses. So just really keen to pass on the knowledge I've learned on my journey and hopefully help a lot of others in the Irish whiskey industry gain some insight into tasting and the technical skills behind it of producing different spirits categories.
Imagine if you'd never been cleaning up the bar and dusting those mirrors and those prints, you'd never have found your calling, would you?
I think there was some wisdom to my parents' jobs that they gave me at a young age, so definitely.
So beyond your pride for Limerick, there's a bigger reason why Limerick is kind of uniquely positioned to be part of the whiskey world again, right? There's something unique about what happens whiskey in Limerick. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was reading through the archives of Limerick, and also reading through the lost distilleries of UK and Ireland, Alfred Bernard makes a very good reference to Limerick, and he says about how the distillery had a rapidly aging characteristics to the spirits there. And I kind of dived and want to understand that a bit better. Was it the size of casks they were using? Was it the type of warehousing? Was it the environment? And from my understanding and my research, it's to do with actually the dynamics of the estuary itself. If you look at other spirit categories, you look at the rum cellars in Liverpool, you look at Bordeaux and Cognac region, you look at the Douro Valley where they have all the port warehouses in Porto. They're all beside the sea. And initially, a lot of that could be down to the ease of movement of those goods. But there was a benefit to it, especially when they reference the Douro Valley, is that the summer temperature and the winter temperature, they have this more consistent climate. And Limerick has a very consistent climate. It's consistently bad, is probably the way to say it. Summers can be beautiful and it's great when we do, but it's Limerick is quite a damp place. As Frank McCourt said, Limerick was the most pious place in Ireland, but that was not down due to our belief, but due to the weather. And it was the only place where you could get dry was the churches, and that's why there were so many in Limerick. And there is to this day so many churches, and they are always a good place to go out of the rain. But if we look at the estuary has this amazing exchange of heat. We have cold water coming down from the largest river in the whole of the country, absolute thousands of tons, liters of water flowing through there. And then we have this massive exchange coming in from the Atlantic, the Gulf Stream. So the warm, briny water comes in, bringing in warm influence into the city. And then we have the cold exchange. So we have a hot, a briny water at high tide and fresh water at low tide. So that's a real change of the environment, as you can imagine, in temperature. And you can really witness that on a number of days, particularly on a cold, frosty morning. You'll always see a fog all across the River Shannon, and it continues all the way down, and it really just highlights the humidity that's there. And that's something that's going to lend itself very, very well to whiskey maturation, is that humidity in the city and the surrounding area.
So we hear the number, the data point of about 2% is the average kind of loss to evaporation, the Angel's share for whiskey, maybe from Middleton or other of the well-known distilleries. Is the argument then, or the hypothesis, that there may be a greater loss, maybe greater than 2% in Limerick?
It's potential. If we were to look at Taiwanese whiskey, we can see that where there's high humidity and high heat, there's a huge loss due to the Angel's share there. It's something that we will be testing. It's been over 100 years since the whiskey has been matured here. So there's very little people that can ask. It's only through the practice of doing this will we discover it. And that's the exciting bit, is actually going through this, like reviving something that was practiced, and something that was very much a tradition here, and something that can be brought back completely.
So you have this unique experiment or hypothesis, or a unique way of testing this hypothesis that you have regarding the maturation rates in Limerick. And so tell me a little bit about this very unusual process that's not normally associated with Ireland.
No, it's a bit of a mad experiment, but it's something that I really wanted to test myself, and was the idea of the evolution of a cask. And probably the best way to describe it is a deconstructed Solero process. If we were to think about what they do in the bodegas of Solero when the production of sherry, they do a very, very similar process where they have a series of casks, and the top of the cask, there's 4 casks stacked on top of each other, the top of them being the youngest, and at the very, very bottom, the oldest. And what they do is they make a withdrawal and they deposit it into the cask below, and they do that for each level. So the one above always goes into the bottom, and at the very, very bottom is where they actually take the liquid off and they do their bottling. So it's the idea is to create a consistent type of style of spirit that has a kind of conveyor belt of production, where you're having the youngest, the eldest, and there's this exchange, beautiful exchange happening. But to do that in whiskey, I just felt it wasn't as interesting of adding new make to the top, and I wanted to really just test, whether the aging process and which stage was the best, and really to kind of get people along on that process to experience that with me. So the first release, the bottles that went out, is the control. These are the cask as it is, and we've sourced the cask, and we're planning on moving this cask to Limerick and allowing the environment to take effect. And the next release that we do will show the influence of the environment on this particular cask. And the final release, final batch 3, will show the result. So it's a real nice experience and a journey. And each of the bottles are being released at cask strength, so they're not being influenced in any way. They're just being filtered, just with a basic filter, no non-chill filtration happening with them. So just trying to give you the experience as if you open that cask yourself and you were to nose it and taste from it. That's what we're trying to do. Each bottle is a time capsule, and it's to explore that exchange. Is there going to be more influence because there's more headspace, because more liquid has been removed? And what is actually occurring in that cask? So it's going to be a real exciting journey, and I'm really keen to see what people think of this. And it's a bit of a mad one, but I'm really, really excited about the prospect of what we can get out of it.
So we typically don't see distilleries releasing components of casks, do we? It's all going into batches, or they're releasing single casks. You're making the argument that the environment is going to change the maturation rate, and so yes, over the course of a number of years, that one cask will be divided into 3 different batches, released separately, each one with its own conditions and influences that you hope will help explain or demonstrate what's happening in Limerick, and then you all get to sit around and have debates until the cows come home about what influenced it. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now this is an experiment. This is the experimental piece. You coming back to this big vision of getting distilling back to Limerick. So obviously there are no distilleries in Limerick today. So you have this really interesting, gradual but increasingly focused, kind of a increasing focus on bringing Limerick into the fold. So you're a Limerick company right now, and you eventually want to be a Limerick distillery. So there's a number of steps between here and there that are going to have to happen. How are you involving Limerick more and more throughout this process?
Absolutely. So the first step is the first cask, the experimental one, to have a maturation bonded warehouse here in Limerick. So that's the very early stages, but this is a very small scale bonded warehouse, and we're planning to scale that up as the brand grows. The following stage is I'm engaged with local farmers who grow barley. Traditionally, they've been growing it for agricultural use, as they just haven't had the local market for the production of barley for malting. So they're really excited about the idea of getting a better yield, a better return for their crops, and growing barley just 4 kilometers south of the city, and having a barley that is a Limerick barley, and using that to work with a distillery and a partner distillery to produce our spirit, and then return those casks to Limerick and to mature them. So, if we were to really look at it critically, and I know a lot of people out there are very passionate about, where spirit comes from and everything like that, but we're trying to do things as precisely as we can. And when it comes to distillation, as you're very aware, it's about the timing, it's about the mash build, it's about the heat, it's about the exchange. The distillery itself, apart from if you look at high ester rums, the environment is very much controlled. They're very clinical. Unless they're using a wood ton mash, there's going to be very little interaction with the equipment apart from the actual shape and size of the still. So, we're trying to do things very much to grow the business and to become a fully fledged Limerick company, but we're going to have to leverage the expertise and the experience of those who are out there and doing a fantastic job. So that's something that I'm very open about and I'm really keen on and really excited about, is that whole stage of working with others and learning from them and gaining their insight, and then eventually using all of that knowledge that we've gained to bring back the process here to Limerick, and eventually to have a full-fledged production here.
I think that's what fascinated me the most when we first started talking, was that you had this there's a 15-year minimum plan here of from conception all the way through to this final, first distillation perhaps,
Sure.
And that's no small bet. And I love this progression towards Limerick, bit by bit, from the growing of the barley to the maturation. I think that's fascinating. I'm also astounded by the incredible number of people that work for this brand already. There's an incredible number. There's you, and then there's also you, and that's it.
Yes. Me, myself, and I are essentially incorporated as a company, which is, it's challenging. It's particularly challenging when back in December, when I launched on the 24th of November, I was very grateful to have my baby boy being born, my first child. And
congratulations.
Thank you. After a week of absolute bliss and joy, I had to return to Ireland to conduct the launch of the whiskey brand. As my wife, being a proud Welshwoman as she is, she's there with her family, and we're back and forth. So I'm doing the opposite of as I used to say, the London commute. But now I'm in Ireland and in Limerick, and spending quite a lot of time away from my family. But the long-term vision is for us to be here. But it's been a challenge, and everything about this project has been done myself. From when you look at a bottle, the first releases, all of them have a lot of heartache and joy in them. So from stories of the label production, I designed it myself. Each of the coins have been designed by myself. They're engraved individually. They're wax dipped. They're everything about them I've done, and it's actually something I don't think many people, when they look at them, would realize from even the tubes. When you go to a manufacturer and you say to them, "I want 100 tubes," they laugh you away. But I had to sweet talk them to be able to get the blank tubes and to get them printed and hand wrap them myself. And yeah, a lot of heartache from just being a one-man band and navigating the red tape of food businesses and operating as a whiskey company. But yeah, hopefully I will have more to join me as time progresses. But for now, yes, it's just be myself.
Well, you and your wife just took delivery of your first employee, which is the good news. So in 18 years, you'll have employee number one. So let's go back to the whiskey then. So you've had your first release. You launched in December. You launched through a number of retail outlets in Limerick and elsewhere, and then you sold a number of bottles through Irish whiskey auctions. Tell me some of the details about the whiskey, the style, the ABV, how many bottles there were.
Sure. So it is a single pot still Irish whiskey. It's been 100 bottles have been released. It's been matured exclusively in the first Sherry Oloroso cask, and it has a beautiful characteristic, and it has a lot of depth and complexity for its years. It is not a particularly old spirit. It's a young spirit, as we could say, but that is the purpose of it. It has to be demonstrate as it is now, and for it to evolve over the time. I bottled it at 61%, so that you could actually have exactly the spirit as it came out of the cask. It's a bit high for some people's palates, but as I say, you're getting that bit more for your buck. And if you want to reduce the ABV, just simply add some water to it. And if you want to have the full Limerick experience, you can always get a bottle of Ballygown and add a bit of Limerick water, bring it out the ABV. But it's just something that I felt, if you want to give somebody the experience of exploring a cask, why interfere with it? Why alter it? So and it's the first release, so it's always going to be the youngest. So you've got the casks; they're going to be aging, and then between your experimentation and your separate aging, separate maturation. So the first 100 bottles sold out between the auction and in retail. Correct? They're not to be found anywhere. No. Yeah, it was very humbling. I was really blown away, and when you're launching a business, and you always get the positive and you always get the negative, and it was something that you're really putting yourself out there. Is anybody going to really care about a spirit that is with a Limerick brand? The positive response was yes, they were interested in seeing a Limerick brand and eventually a Limerick whiskey. So that's something that has been very much highlighted by the response I've got. So it's been really...
That's great. That's fantastic. Tell me about when the general public might be able to next purchase a bottle. When will the next release be? No pressure now. I know you're just coming off the stress of the first release.
Oh, no. Yeah, so it's something that I'm working on at the moment, and I don't want to rush anything. I don't want to just put something out there for the sake of it. It has to be thought and meaning behind it. And that's something that's very true to whatever I do. It has to have a purpose. And I'm working on something that will be out hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months. So that's something that I will be encouraging anybody who's interested to visit the website and register if they're interested in a bottle, so they can be updated when that release will go out. So yeah, it's something that I'm working very heavily on.
That's fantastic. I think that anybody who's a fan of Irish whiskey needs to support passionate individuals who are putting their own money and time and sweat on the line to bring out whiskey, and not just to make a quick buck. There's no quick buck when you have to plan 15 years ahead, and when you have to do every aspect of this. But what I love about this is not only are you a passionate whiskey individual, you're proud of Limerick, you're proud of its heritage, you're proud of the distilling history. You pay homage to that throughout your social media channels, which I love following. And there's a real passion and a story here. So if we want Irish whiskey to grow, we have to support the individuals that are risking everything to help this grow and to bring Irish whiskey back to where it was 100 years ago. So I encourage everybody to follow the journey of Thomond Gate Whiskey. I'm going to put on the screen here, for those of you following on video on YouTube, I'll put the links to Nick's website for the brand. If you're following on the podcast, Nick, where can folks find you online?
Yes, absolutely. So they can find me at thomondgatewhiskey.com. They can get on Instagram, which is thomondgatew. So they should be able to find me there. And on Facebook, Thomond Gate Irish Whiskey. So if you go there, you'll be able to find me there.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on a great launch. I've yet to taste the product due to the timing. We met in Cork, and we almost had the whiskey ready, but as things, we know what happens at the launch of a brand. We couldn't quite get it in our hands, but
no.
You promised me a sip when I come back to Ireland next, so I'm going to hold you to that.
Well, your bottle is here safe and sound with me. It's a rare one, as you can imagine. So eventually we'll get it to you. So
brilliant,
absolutely.
Fantastic. Can't wait to try it. Well, thanks for joining us on Stories and Sips. I'm going to do. We're going to highlight more founders and individuals who are passionate about the whiskey industry over the coming months, and you're the first that we've had that we've had this kind of a chat with. So I'm thrilled that we were able to do it. Can't wait to hear what's coming next. Go sleep for 3 months now and recover from that launch. And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.